Hi, it's Janet Fitch. It's Writing Wednesday. This is the night version, so I have my glass of wine instead of my cup of coffee, and it's Virginia Woolf. These were wine glasses from the room of her own retreat a couple of years ago, and I just love Virginia, so I'm treating her to a glass of wine, treating you to a glass of wine. Happy holidays. I thought that tonight's Writing Wednesday, I would talk about a little about Olga Tokarczuk's Nobel win. It was last year, of course, the year that Nobel stepped on its own skirt and fell down the stairs. But this year we have, so there's two winners, but Olga got her award this year for last year. So I'm still excited about it. I'm thrilled to say that my friend Jennifer, why am I blanking out? My friend Jennifer Croft translated Flights, which is Olga's, the thing that kicked the Nobel over the edge, I think, for her, and it also won the Booker International Prize and everything else in the world. So my friend Jennifer got to go to Stockholm and see Olga give her speech, and everybody in their black ties and their long dresses, and it's pretty exciting to go to Stockholm with your author. And Olga, as all of the Nobelists, had some very, very profound thought, except for maybe Dylan, but he had Patti Smith, so what are you going to do? But Olga had some very profound thoughts about fiction, very profound thoughts about literature and where we are in the world. And I thought I would read just a little bit and talk a little bit about her Nobel lecture, which is something you do when you get your Nobel, then you have to give a lecture to all these amazing people and really think about what your field and what it means in the scope of civilization. Is a big deal to give that Nobel speech. No wonder Dylan shirked the responsibility. But Olga did not, and I'm very glad she didn't. And I just wanted to read you a couple little bits of it that you might want to think about as writers. Two major ideas caught my attention in the Nobel speech. And if you go to nobelprize.org, I think it is, you can read the whole thing in English. But there were just a few things that I just wanted to share with you that I thought were so well said and interesting and worth thinking about. So she talks about this, how we think about the world, and perhaps even more importantly, how we narrate it, have a massive significance. A thing that happens and is not told ceases to exist and perishes. This is a fact well known to not only historians, but also, and perhaps above all, to every stripe of politician and tyrant. He who has and weaves the story is in charge. It's such an interesting thing, we fail to recognize sometimes the importance of telling our stories, and not just memoir, you've got to know what happened to me personally, but the importance of telling stories to keep the reality alive. When you have a world in which only certain kinds of stories can get out, it reshapes the human being. When they're, I've dealt with the Russian Revolution for 12 years. And believe me, when governments begin to shape the narrative, things get erased. Lives get erased. Thousands of millions of lives get erased, but a certain kind of experience gets erased. And that's why it's important to tell your story as if it matters, because it does matter. I remember having a big ongoing conversation with another young woman in college who was a philosophy major and I was a history major. And she kept challenging me why we study history. It's just a chronicle of kings and wars, and she just baited me. I was a freshman. She was senior. And she was doing it on purpose, the Socratic method, over drinks, of course. And I finally got to the point where I realized that if people don't know their own history, you can do anything you want with those people. When you talk about a totalitarian society, I think this is even a quote in White Oleander, I believe it so strongly, is that when history is erased in a totalitarian state, you can do anything you want with those people because they don't know how they got where they are. And I think literature in particular is a way of tracing how we get where we are. And then what? And then what? But, even if you feel telling us your story about being a kid in the 50s and making your little fake omelet on the cardboard kid stove that your dad put together for you, is an experience that will die. It will cease to exist, and it was a very vivid experience. You want to capture that. You want to hold that. There's a reason that these stories are valuable, because it's not just a story about that one little girl making her fake omelet on the cardboard stove that her dad put together at 4 a.m. after a bleary Christmas Eve party. And it's the whole world that we've just kind of encapsulated there that will be lost. Joyce Carol Oates said that's one of the primary reasons that people write, that we write and that we read, is to memorialize the actual human experience. Then she's talking about fake news and that whole what is truth and how have you ever noticed every movie this season is like based on a true story? It always has to be based on a true story because did this really happen? If it didn't really happen, then it's a lie, Whereas what they're lying about tends to be the based on the true story. It's the based on part. That's, So fiction is completely made up and tells some essential truths that cannot often be gotten at in any other way. So she says, she addresses this whole fake news things, and coming from a former Eastern Europe, Soviet bloc, Eastern European country, these are extremely important issues. And right now, the reason we're listening to a lot of Eastern European voices and the revolution and the literature of that time is it speaks directly to things that are happening at at this minute. So here she says, fiction has lost the reader's trust. This is like all that based on a true story. Did this really happen? Fiction has lost the reader's trust since lying has become a dangerous weapon of mass destruction. Even if it is still a primitive tool. This is where we're getting, the fake news and the pizza in the basement and holding the child, all that stuff. And Sandy Hook didn't happen. And it's just a tidal wave. I am often, this is Olga Tokarczuk, who just won the Nobel, her Nobel speech. I am often asked this incredulous question: is this thing you wrote really true? And every time I feel this question bodes the end of literature. This question, innocent from a reader's point of view, sounds to the writer's ear truly apocalyptic. What am I supposed to say? How am I to explain the ontological, which means the essence, relating to the essence of things? The ontological status of Hans Castorp, who's the hero of the magic, Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain, Anna Karenina, or Winnie the Pooh. I consider this type of readerly curiosity, whether it's real, is it true, a regression of civilization. It is a major impairment of our multidimensional ability, concrete, historical, but also symbolic and mythic, being able to be told a story, to participate in the chain of events called our lives. Life is created by events, but it is only when we are able to interpret them, to try to understand them, and lend them meaning, that they're transformed into experience. Hi, Marla. Events are facts, but experience is something inexpressibly different. It is experience and not any event that makes up the material of our lives. Experience is a fact that has been interpreted. The experience, say, of cooking on that little cardboard stove in the Eisenhower administration. Experience is a fact that has been interpreted and situated in memory. It also refers to a certain foundation we have in our minds, to a deep structure of significations. So there's a structure of meaning, what things mean, what are their symbols of, deep inside of us, upon which we can unfurl our own lives and examine them fully and carefully. It gives us a basis. I believe that myth performs the function of that structure. Everyone knows that myths never really happened, but are always going on. Now they go on not only through the adventures of ancient heroes, but rather also make their way into the ubiquitous, ever-present, and most popular stories of contemporary film, games, and literature. The lives of the inhabitants of Mount Olympus have been transferred to Dynasty. That's an 80s soap opera, if you don't know. And the heroic acts of the heroes are attended to by Lara Croft, action figure. In this ardent division into truth and falsehood, the tales of our experience that literature creates have their own dimension. I have never been particularly excited about any straight distinction between fiction and nonfiction. And her book, Wow, Flights, is super... it's like Sebald, H.G. Sebald, The Emigrants. You're not quite sure what she's making up and what is coming from research. It's a fascinating book. So she's not that excited about the difference between fiction and nonfiction unless we understand such a distinction to be declarative and discretionary. So it's up to the writer to say what's what. In a sea of many definitions of fiction, the one I like best is also the oldest, and it comes from Aristotle. Fiction is always a kind of truth. I'm also convinced by the distinction between the true story and plot I remember this. I'm also convinced by the distinction between the true story and plot related by the writer and essayist E.M. Forster, and we've actually talked about this in terms of what is story. He said that when we say the king died and then the queen died, it's a story. Well, that's just a succession of events. But when we say the king died and then the queen died of grief, that's a plot. X because Y, or Y because X. Every fictionalization involves a transition. This is really amazing. From the question, what happened next, and then, to an attempt at understanding it based on our human experience. Why did it happen that way? Literature begins with that why, even if we were to answer the question over and over with an ordinary "I don't know." I urge you to go online and read that Nobel speech. There are so many things that Olga has to say to us fiction writers. And one of them is to, not be hypnotized by the and then, but really going for the causal relationships. And what do you believe? What do you think? What the author gets that discretionary task to decide. I can't recommend you reading her Nobel speech and everybody's Nobel speech. There's always so much inspiration in these talks. And she really believes that the people's needing it to be a true story is the end of civilization. And I believe that too, fiction, the ability to get a deeper meaning out of a work of art rather than having to show its credential, having to show its real ID. If I never see another movie, based on, inspired by, true events, it'll be too soon. I can't wait for that to be over. Also, all the cartoons. I'm sorry, but enough is enough. So I am taking questions here on a December night. So I'm going to be watching you for any questions you might have. And I have some reader questions while we're waiting. So here's one I got. All right. What can a detective or investigator learn about someone by going through their garbage? That is such a great little exercise for all of you. I mean, what could you learn about somebody going through the garbage? Well, you could, unless you're a super shredder, which would tell them something too. Very neat, very, this person is going to be harder to investigate than you'd think. They mop up after themselves. They're a cautious person. So even somebody who shreds everything, pulls the label. Oh, my mom used to mark out the labels on any kind of prescription before the bottle went into the trash. This is a maybe not paranoid, but a very cautious person, and a person who imagines ill intent from others. Somebody who even blanks out the address on junk mail. That person is really paranoid. I would imagine they could learn from that. But you could learn a lot. Person is cold. Oh my God, all the Kleenex. They're ill. They, certainly if they don't blank out their prescriptions, you can see what they're taking and how much, how often. Are they working a couple of doctors? Are they working 2 or 3 doctors, 4 or 5? You could learn a lot. What magazines people take. They throw out big handfuls of magazines they've never opened. They have dreams of being an intellectual, but they, those New York Review of Books just go straight into the trash. Yeah, imagine the trash. Alice says she's going to imagine the trash of current work in progress characters. What else might be in there? Trashy books that they, don't think Goodwill would really want. There are certain books that are so hideous that I don't sell them. I don't even give them away. They just go right into the trash. I see myself as a monitor of my little neighborhood book, the little library. And every once in a while there's somebody who just puts all their funky books in there because they're cleaning out and they just throw them in there. It's like, nobody wants to read that, you know? These are paperback books that are more like, you know, they're just used like Kleenex. Oh, touch your Fern Michaels, I'm sorry. What else would be in your, would be a telltale in your, that would be telltale, that'd be interesting for people to find. You can tell people when they go on a vegetable, you know, the super cleanup binge, and they get all the juiced pulp and stuff. They're on good behavior. They're trying to clean it up, and then you see the cat food and the vodka bottles, you know. Yeah, alcohol, cigarettes, other vices. I know people who put their empties in other people's trash because they can't deal with how much they actually drink. What else might we find that would be interesting for an investigator? You know, suddenly all the, you know, a parent and a grown child, say, have a rift, terrible rift. Something happens, and suddenly the trash is full of old sports pennants and, you know, trophies, and, you know, the mom is just like, I'm not keeping this shit anymore. You know, not after that. You don't get that anymore. Wedding dress in the trash certainly would tell you something. A lot of golf clubs. I mean, expensive stuff belonging to, you know, perhaps a partner goes in the trash. That leather jacket, instead of going to the Goodwill, it's like, it's in the trash. Oh my God. I think that is a super what they can learn about something going through their garbage. Any kind of paper material. I can see, do they do the crosswords? Do they do the Sudoku? Do they take the newspaper? What magazines, if any, do they take? Any kind of reading material? Do they recycle? Or do they just make a mess of their trash? Do they mix everything together? Or do they, you know, are they like no recycle? You know, they no plastic in there. They're completely clean and vegan and stuff. You know, you could learn a lot. Here's anybody else for the detective in the trash? Okay. What is your take on the use of the verb said only to carry dialogue, as other alternatives are deemed superfluous? Okay, so you don't say he exclaimed, you know, he chuckled, you know, all that kind of stuff. Most of the time you don't need, these are called attributions, and most times you don't need attributions at all. If you can follow what people are saying by their tone of voice, by use of gestures. There's gesture attribution. So somebody says something, he flicked his cigarette into the ashtray. You don't have to say he said, because he has the gesture. He flicks his cigarette, so you know it was him speaking. There can be a landscape attribution. He stared out at the setting sun. That, you know, I think we're going to split up. You don't have to say he said, she said, because he is looking at the landscape and then he speaks. So for the most part, you can get rid of he said, she said. Sometimes people use it rhythmically. There's a writer, David Francis, who, if you look at any of his books, Stray Dog Winter, Wedding Bush Road, you'll see that he uses the attribution rhythmically. He will use said, he said, blah, 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 she said, da, 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 da. And it's a stylistic thing. It's a rhythmic thing. But generally, unless you're using it for a purpose, only when you can't tell who's speaking. And that shouldn't be often. You should usually, your reader should be able to follow. Here's Nancy Ewan has something to throw in the throw out question. A friend and I once walked by a dumpster with dozens of greeting cards, all written by the same person, and a jewelry box with a small gold heart necklace. Well, there's a story right there. That is fantastic. When my grandmother died, she had 3 garbage bags full of greeting cards. She never threw out a greeting card. What does that mean? But I love this, the greeting cards and the jewelry box. There's a story. Cool. All right. So the said is good, but mostly you don't need it. Use the other kinds of attributions. What were your goals when you started writing seriously? Okay. My goals changed over time. But when I first started writing seriously, it was more, I was going to show everybody who had been a jerk to me or had, dumped me or had been dismissive of me in some way through my life, which was quite a frickin' list. And I wanted to make a mark. It was very aggressive. It was fueled by that, I'm going to show you, I'm going to make you pay attention to me, you're not going to talk over me anymore. It was, I came with a chip on my shoulder. And then that changed over time, but that was the goal when I started writing. Anybody want to chime in on that one? What was your goal when you started writing? What did you want to do with yourself? I think a lot of people are, like me, wanting to make their mark. But some people, it's memorial. If you look at Joyce Carol Oates, she says a lot of it is memorial. You want to preserve a moment of time. You want to preserve experience, not just events, but experience, like Olga was talking about. Okay, here's another one. What are the differences between how books and movies are written besides prose? Okay, if you imagine a movie is a bridge, and you go from here to there over the bridge. The train goes this way. Whereas a novel is more like a watershed. It's a system that comes from many places and meshes. It's a much more complex ecosystem. You have a lot of subplots. You have space to go off on a tangent and return. If you were trying to get over the bridge, those tangents would really screw you up because you'd go over the side. So Alice started as a poet and wanted to find a way to say things I couldn't say in real life. Yeah. Have you ever been in a situation where speaking the truth saved you? Yes. I think that some of the most important moments in life, especially if you tended to be a person or a character of yours, if you tend to be a person who protects people from what you really think and wants to make people feel better and grease the wheels and, try not to confront people, trying to, get through life without a lot of friction, especially if maybe earlier in life you were somebody who created a lot of drama, and then you decide you're not going to do that, and suddenly you're holding your tongue, you're putting a nice spin on something, even, a good scoop of hypocrisy, and then you get yourself into a situation where the truth has to come out. And there have been, and it does save you, but it's shattering when you have been protecting somebody against something that you've been thinking, something, anybody who's been in a relationship that one person is more into than the other person, and they're expecting a continuation and escalation of that relationship, and then to have to say, actually, you have an incorrect impression of what's going on here. The longer you've let that go on, the more traumatic it is, but it saves you, even if it's ugly and really hurts people. I have been in many situations where speaking the truth has saved me. And that would be a wonderful exercise, a wonderful, to write a scene where somebody has not told the truth, not told the truth, and finally has to admit what they really think or something that really went on. I think that the habit of telling the truth is really interesting. There was a period in my life where I wasn't, as upfront as I should have been. I was kind of a fabulist in my mind and wove stories and stuff, and I just got myself in a hell of a lot of trouble. And I decided at one point that I was just going to be strictly honest and, not lie at all, tell the truth. And that was a very hard period of my life. I lost a lot of friends, acquaintances. I kept my friends, but, and then as you get older, you find ways to be kind as well as honest. It's always a balancing act, and it's very interesting in fiction. The truth in human relations is very interesting. I'm going to be on a full. I have a young friend who is on faculty. She's in the philosophy department. She's organizing a symposium, and she asked me if I would come and talk about a topic of ethics in daily life, in everyday life, with a bunch of philosophers, that's going to be interesting. Because, I have my own take on the good and the ethical, and what is useful to people, who are useful, do you always tell the truth? Is that an stance? Are there times that there are other virtues besides that? I think that in White Oleander, she determined that truth was the only dependable virtue. In Marina, courage is the transcendent virtue. So that'll be interesting. Looking forward to that. Why is it considered bad writing to describe a character's looks? Does anybody have problems with that? Describing your character? Whenever you have a first-person character, describing them physically is a big challenge. It's important to do it naturally. If you have a character, say Marina Makarova in the Revolution of Marina M, how to describe her as a first-person character. Now, she is a 16-year-old girl when we first meet her. And a 16-year-old girl who is in love and had her first kiss with this guy is much more likely to look at herself in the mirror afterwards, and see kind of the ravages of kissing people, and, you know, what do I look like, you know, and so it was a perfect opportunity to get in there and describe her. But you don't just like describing anything in fiction, you don't describe people all at once like a big info dump and then you don't describe them again ever. It's always natural, and it's only enough to kind of sketch things in, and then you'll sketch it again in a different way, and the picture becomes dimensional, and every time you see them you're building that picture. So people will always call my character Marina, like they call her um, Liska, which is fox, little fox, because she's redhead. So I can sneak her appearance in here and there. When she's freaked out, she might take a look at her in Chimes of Lost Cathedral, the second one. She's been through some brutal stuff, and she sees herself in the mirror, and she doesn't even recognize herself. That she doesn't even wear her own face anymore. So it's not just hair color, eye color. That's the kind of stuff nobody remembers. I mean, basically, it doesn't tell you anything about character. You do, hi Linda, you do want somebody to have characteristics that the reader can remember. So it's irregularities. If somebody is beautiful, give them something that is a flaw that we will remember that. You know, it's like a beautiful girl with a chipped front tooth. That chipped front tooth, we're going to remember her forever. Or little, you know, I mean, whatever you can find. If some guy is this beautiful, you know, hunk of whatever, I mean, no, you know, find the thing that is memorable about that guy. You know, could he be missing the tip of a finger? Could he, you know, scars are great, you know, any kind of irregularity will make them memorable. It's like, oh yeah, it's the guy with a missing finger. So bad writing is always the long blonde, you know, anything that's a cliche, the long blonde, flowing blonde hair, and the big blue eyes, and big brown eyes, and blah, blah. Anything that you can imagine Fabio on the cover, you know, try again. And try for things that tell you something about the character rather than just like a police lineup. So, you know, if they have curly hair, you know, curly hair, what does that tell you about the character? Nothing. But matted on one side from sleeping, you know, or they don't comb their hair, is much more telling than eye color, hair color. What shape are their eyes? There's a wonderful book on Chinese face reading. And whether you know, believe it as a, you know, prognostication of the future or whatever, it refines your ability to look at the human face and notice the shape of eyes, the shape of noses, the shape of the face, the shape of the head. And know that in the Chinese system, these actually have their character tags. You know, chicken eye, fox eye, dragon eye. You know, the corners of the mouth. Do they turn up? Do they turn down? Are there little pockets in the corners? That's like a kind of a brutal person. Just, you know. So make sure you get some value out of your description of people. Other people can call them stuff. I have a character in a story I'm working on right now whose name is Slim. And she's, you know, she's 80. But you can tell who she was when she was in high school, because that's when she got the name. You know, she was a grew up in Hollywood. She was a Goldwyn girl. She was so to call her slim tells you something about her. So this is, here's a question. Okay, Linda has a question. I was thinking about, another writer said it's important to read if you want to write, but why? Seriously, are we learning to copy? I never heard the reasoning for this rule. You have to read if you want to write. Okay, literature is a conversation. You're having a conversation with the writers of the past and the writers of the present. You are joining the freeway that is already in progress. You're to think that nobody else had anything to say about this. It's like, yeah, you could ride on the shoulders of giants, but you don't even know that there are giants. You don't know what's been done. Of the ice skaters of the past, you'd work with probably with a coach who has been in a tradition of figure skating and knows what people have already been able to accomplish and would teach you how to accomplish that. There's just no substitute for being part of the conversation. So I hope that helps, that it is important. I do have terrible Wi-Fi, and so every once in a while you will see things go blank. Hopefully you didn't, but in case. So hopefully that gives you some idea. There's a million reasons why you want to read widely and deeply and read the best, because I don't think anybody is that kind of a genius. Everybody has to have that interaction with the art the art form that they are working in. And then the last question that I had on my list for the evening, what is the difference between character development and character growth? That's a pretty good question. What do you think? I'm thinking that character development is adding to what we know about the character. It's like watching a photograph develop. Whereas character growth is like personal growth. It is the change in the character over time. So we're looking for the both character development and character growth when you're of your protagonist when you're working on fiction. So I think that is a good place to stop. And so I wish you a happy holidays. I do recommend you reading Olga Tokarczuk's Nobel speech, and look around at other people's Nobel speeches. And wishing you happy holidays. Night.